I thought I failed Stanford. Turns out my parents made sure I never had a chance. They told me the university rejected me, said I wasn't ready to be that far from home. But 1 year later, I found an email, buried in my spam folder, from Stanford. "We regret you didn't accept our full ride offer." My hands shook, my vision blurred, and everything I believed about my family shattered. I kept quiet. I smiled. I stayed. But I also kept receipts. And now, I'm ready to tell you how they tried to bury my future, and how I clawed my way back, one truth at a time. For as long as I could remember, my name had been stitched to this town's idea of promise. Teachers whispered it with pride. Neighbors asked if I'd be the first to make it out. I studied under flickering light bulbs, skipped parties for practice exams, and wore hand-me-downs with quiet dignity. When the letter from Stanford arrived, thick, official, undeniable, I didn't scream. I just held it in my lap like a secret too sacred to share. Full ride, 4 years, environmental science, the future I fought for, was finally real. I told my parents over dinner. My dad barely blinked. My mum dropped her fork. No congratulations. Just silence, like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. "We'll talk about it," my father said after a long pause, eyes on the mashed potatoes. "Let's not rush anything." That night I heard whispers outside my room. My mother crying, my father saying, "If she goes, what happens to us? You want her out there alone?" The walls were thin, but my heart felt thicker than ever. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and imagined California sun melting the Ohio snow. The next morning, the financial aid portal wouldn't open. Error message, application incomplete. I panicked. Maybe I missed a step. Maybe I wasn't as careful as I thought. I told myself I'd call them later, fix it. But life moved. My mother got sick. Dad needed help with bills. I started a job at the gas station on Route 9. Stanford faded like a dream you forget by noon. 12 months later, I was wiping down a soda spill when my phone buzzed. A subject line blinked at me. "We're sorry you didn't enroll. Stanford University." My stomach dropped. I rushed home, ransacked the drawer where I kept old papers. There, beneath tax returns and coupons, was the acceptance letter, still pristine. I logged into the email I hadn't touched in a year. Message after message, unanswered, unopened. Orientation invites, housing options, and one email from the financial aid office. "We received your withdrawal form. We're sorry to see you go." But I never sent one. I confronted my parents that evening. My voice trembled. "Did you cancel my enrollment?" My father stood stiff. "We did what was best. That place would have changed you. You're better here." My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. I pressed. "Did you forge my name?" She exhaled slowly. "We only wanted to keep our family together." "You lied," I whispered. "We protected you," my dad snapped. "You think the world's going to be kind to a girl like you out there alone? You think they care?" I turned to my mother, desperate for contradiction. Instead, she said quietly, "I'm sorry, but if you left, it would have broken this family." My breath caught. That night, I sat in bed, the Stanford letter on my lap once more, the same weight. But this time, not sacred, heavy with betrayal. I thought of everything I'd missed. The campus I'd never walked, the people I'd never meet. I also thought of the girl I used to be, the one who believed hard work was enough. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back. She wore a uniform with someone else's name tag, clocked in hours to pay rent, and lived in a room that wasn't hers. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't broken. Just still. That stillness became resolve. I reopened the Stanford portal, applied again. Same program, same dream. Only this time, under my own terms. No signatures but mine. No promises but the ones I'd make to myself. The next morning I walked past my parents without a word. My father read the newspaper. My mother folded laundry. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the ease with which they pretended it never happened. But this time, I wouldn't forget. I printed every email, saved every message, tucked them in a folder labeled receipts, because one day I'd need them, and when that day came, I'd be ready. Most mornings started at 5:30 a.m. I'd throw on a black apron, tie my hair in a knot, and head to Gracie's diner before the sun cracked the sky. By 6 bars, I was pouring coffee for truckers and retirees who never looked twice at my name tag. They called me Sweetheart, left crumpled bills on sticky tables, and didn't know that the girl at refilling their creamers once had a full ride to Stanford. After my shift, I'd catch the bus to community college. Intro to environmental systems, a far cry from the Ivy League lectures I once imagined. The classrooms smelled like floor wax and disappointment. Professors mumbled through slides. Students scrolled on their phones. And still, I took notes like my life depended on it. Maybe because it did. On good days, I told myself I was lucky to be in school at all. On bad days, I scrolled through Instagram and watched old classmates in dorm rooms decorated with fairy lights and California sunsets. Their captions said things like, "Manifesting joy," or "Just got published in Stanford's Lit Mag." I'd double tap with a smile that felt like static. Then one afternoon, I ran into Claire. Claire had been the kind of girl who made student council look glamorous, polished, loud, effortlessly popular. She spotted me at the campus cafe, halfway through wiping down a sticky booth. "Emily?" she said, blinking. "Is that you?" I nodded. "Hey, Claire." "Wow, it's been a while." She looked confused. "Weren't you going to Stanford?" I laughed too fast. "Didn't work out." She tilted her head. "Weird. I was part of the freshman mentoring committee last fall. I remember your name on the incoming student list." My breath caught. "You sure?" She nodded. "Positive. You were listed. We even had your bio and photo. Then one day, it just vanished. No withdrawal notice or anything." My heart thudded. I thanked her quickly and left the cafe. That night, I opened the email account my parents once set up for scholarship stuff. I hadn't touched it since the Stanford debacle. Logging in took 3 password resets and 1 security question I barely remembered. The inbox was full. Really full. Stanford, Berkeley, Amherst. Even a leadership scholarship I never knew I applied for. Some messages were weeks old. Others were from last year. All of them unread. I scrolled through with shaking hands, stomach curling inward. Attached to one email was a withdrawal form. My name signed in tight cursive. But it wasn't my handwriting. I clicked through sent messages. Dozens of replies I'd never typed. Each one cordial. Each one saying, "Thank you." But no. One even mentioned family obligations. I sat there, breathing like I was underwater. I printed every email, every form. Started a new folder on my desktop labeled Proof. Just seeing the word made my skin crawl. The next day, I bought a notebook, one of those cheap, spiral-bound ones with a red cover. I started writing everything. Not just the facts, the feelings, the doubts. The nights I cried so quietly, my pillow stayed dry, but my chest didn't. I wrote like I was digging myself out with a spoon, carving tunnel after tunnel in the dark. Sometimes I'd pause mid-sentence, staring at the page. I'd ask, "Am I being dramatic?" Then I'd remember my mother's voice. "You don't have to go far to be someone." Maybe she meant to comfort me. Maybe she meant to trap me. One night, it rained hard. I stood outside on the porch, arms wrapped around myself. The streetlight flickered. Water ran in rivers down the sidewalk. And I whispered almost to the sky, "If you were me, would you forgive them?" That question stayed with me. Would you? Would you forgive the people who robbed you not of money or gifts, but of time, of identity, of a version of yourself that only lived in their shadow? I didn't have the answer, but I knew I wouldn't stay quiet anymore. I opened the Stanford application again. Same essay prompt, same form. But this time, I didn't use my legal name. I typed, Lane Ellis. Lane, my middle name. Ellis, my grandmother's maiden name. It felt like putting on armor. No parents, no forged forms, no past. Just me, reborn in pixels. As I hit submit, my chest ached with something between fear and freedom. Then I whispered again, this time to myself. Let's see what happens when they don't know who I am. I didn't mean for it to be a blog. It started as a single post on a student forum. Anonymous, raw, half catharsis, half confession. I titled it, "They Said I Wasn't Good Enough, but It Wasn't Me Who Believed That." I didn't name names. I didn't mention Stanford. Just the truth. That I once earned something I never got to claim, and that the people who should have celebrated me were the ones who buried it. By the time I checked the post again the next day, it had over 4,000 views. People commented from all over. Students, teachers, even parents. Some said they'd lived it. Some said they were the parents. Some just said, thank you. I thought I was alone. So I kept writing. I created a blog, called it The Silent Scholarship, and signed every entry with E. Lane. It became my armor, my voice, my space. I wrote from campus libraries and laundromats, between shifts and before lectures. Each post peeled back a new layer of who I'd been and who I was trying to become. It wasn't all pretty. I wrote about rage, about the guilt that came with rage, about the grief of losing something you never had in the first place. And yet, people kept coming back, kept sharing, kept saying, "Me too." One night, scrolling through messages, one caught my eye. No name, just a username. Tiny Windows 01. The message was short. "I'm younger than you. My family says I can't apply out of state either. But your words, they made me feel less broken. Thank you." I stared at it longer than I should have. Something in the phrasing, quiet, precise, hesitant, felt familiar. I didn't know for sure until I saw the profile picture. A tiny sliver of sky from a window I once looked through every morning. It was my little sister's bedroom window. I closed the laptop, heart racing. She knew. Somehow she knew it was me. And she hadn't told anyone. That night I cried for the first time in months. Not because I was hurt, but because, for the first time, I didn't feel entirely alone. Weeks passed. My application to Stanford under the name Lane Ellis moved through the system. Then, one afternoon after class, I found a flyer on a corkboard, faculty-led writing group for displaced students. I showed up late, out of breath, unsure if I belonged. That's when I met Professor Ava Lynn. She wore thick-framed glasses, spoke like her words had edges, and didn't flinch when I said I was writing about betrayal. "I was supposed to go to Columbia," she said, deadpan. "My father locked me in the house the day before the train left." The room went silent. "I still left," she added, "but it took me 10 years to forgive myself for leaving them behind." Later, when we were alone, I asked her what she meant. "You don't need forgiveness," she said, pouring tea into mismatched mugs. "Not from them. Not even from yourself. You only need freedom. And that, my dear, is yours to take." It hit me harder than I expected. That weekend, I moved into student housing. A cramped room with a single bed, a desk, and a window facing a brick wall. It was mine. No one controlled the lock. No one stood outside the door. The first night, I cooked instant noodles on a hot plate, sat cross-legged on the floor, took a bite. It burned my tongue. I laughed out loud. I wasn't in a dorm with fairy lights or a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, but I was here. I was real. And for the first time in years, I wasn't pretending to be okay. I was okay. The next morning, an email waited in my inbox. Subject: Invitation to speak. Stanford Advocacy Program. They'd read the blog. They'd traced the story. They didn't know who I was exactly, but they knew what I stood for. The message ended with, "We'd be honored if you shared your experience with our students. Many of them come from families like yours. Many feel voiceless. Let them hear yours." I stared at the screen, hands trembling again. Not with fear, but with something else. Maybe hope. Maybe the weight of finally being seen. I didn't reply right away. I closed the laptop, looked out the window, took a deep breath. I thought of my sister, of Claire, of Professor Lin, of every anonymous message that whispered, "Me too." Then I opened the laptop again and typed, "Yes." I'd be honored. The email wasn't impulsive. I'd written and rewritten it over 3 days. The subject line read, "In case you ever wondered." Attached were PDFs, screenshots of Stanford's original offer, the forged withdrawal form, emails from financial aid, and finally, a direct link to my blog. I didn't add a message. I didn't ask for a response. I just hit send and sat still, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. Hours passed. The reply came the next morning, from my father. What a slap in the face, after everything we've done for you. You think airing our family's dirty laundry makes you brave? You're not a survivor. You're just ungrateful. You'll see someday when the world forgets your name. Who's still there? Not us. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. The words landed with less impact than he probably imagined. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped needing their approval and started mourning the idea that I ever did. But the silence after that, it hurt more than I expected, until, a week later, another envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper, creased, careful handwriting. Dear Mom, if I ever have a daughter, I promise I won't hold her back the way you held me. I'll let her run. I'll let her leave. I'll love her enough not to keep her small, even if it scares me. Especially then. Love, M. The date at the top was 20 years ago. It was my mother's handwriting. No message came with the letter, no explanation. But it said everything. She had once dreamed of freedom, too, and had buried it under motherhood, under duty, under fear. I folded the page and placed it in the same folder as my Stanford letters. This wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. But it was the truth, and sometimes the truth is all you have to hold on to. The interview came a few days later. A local TV producer had reached out after finding my blog. I agreed cautiously. They offered hair and makeup. I declined. I wanted to look like me. We sat in a quiet studio, lights warm, cameras humming. The interviewer leaned in. "You've stayed anonymous for so long. Why come forward now?" I met her gaze. Because silence protects the wrong people. We talked for 30 minutes. About the lie, the recovery, the students who had written to me, the sister who still lived in that house, the parents I hadn't seen in over a year. When the segment aired, it was picked up by regional news, then online platforms, then national education outlets. Suddenly, the silent scholarship had a face, and with that came the inevitable message from my father. It wasn't an email this time. It was a video call. I let it ring the first time, the second, the third. On the fourth, I answered. His face looked older, thinner. The anger I remembered wasn't there, but neither was remorse. Just wait. "You really put this out into the world, huh?" he said. I nodded. He rubbed his jaw. "It's not that I hated how smart you were, He stopped, looked down. "I was scared. Scared you'd leave and never come back. Scared that if you saw what was out there, you'd forget about us." I didn't speak. He sighed. "I didn't know how to hold on without caging you. I didn't know how to love without control." "I know," I said quietly. He looked up. "So you understand?" I let that sit for a moment. "No," I said finally. "I understand why you did it. That doesn't mean I excuse it." He blinked. "Emily, you didn't lose me because I left." I interrupted, my voice steady. "You lost me the moment you chose to keep me with lies instead of letting me go with love." The call ended not with a shout, not with a tear, but with silence. Heavy, honest. And in that silence I felt something shift. Not in him, but in me. I wasn't the daughter waiting for permission anymore. I was the woman reclaiming her name. The apartment wasn't much. A studio above a bakery, with peeling paint and windows that fogged over every morning. The water pressure was unreliable. The walls were thin. The floor creaked like it had secrets. But it was mine. No one knocked unless they were invited. No one walked in without asking. No one told me to turn down the music. The first night, I put my phone on silent, pulled my speakers from storage, and played the one song I had always loved, the one my father used to call Noise. It started soft, piano and strings, but then built to a voice that felt like flight. I laid flat on the floor, eyes closed, letting it wash over me. No one shut it off. I laughed, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like return. Classes were harder now. Stanford didn't coddle. The students around me weren't just smart. They were sharpened by privilege, by confidence. I had imposter syndrome so loud it echoed, but I showed up. I sat in the front. I asked questions, and slowly I began to believe that maybe I belonged. One afternoon, in the university archive for a class project, I stumbled across something I wasn't looking for. A digitized newsletter from 1987, a small photo of the Future Scholars of Ohio awardees. There, third from the left, was a boy with my eyes, my last name, my father. He had won a full scholarship to Columbia. There was even a quote beside his picture. "I want to study engineering and bring innovation back to my hometown." My breath caught. He never told me. A librarian helped me pull additional articles. He had been accepted, had planned to go. But then, mysteriously, his enrollment was canceled weeks before term. No details, just a footnote. Personal reasons. I went home and stared at the ceiling, the music still playing in the background. My father hadn't just sabotaged me. He had once been me. The realization didn't soften my pain, but it reframed it. Maybe he wasn't just controlling. Maybe he was wounded. Maybe he saw my freedom as a mirror to his regret. And maybe that's what made it worse. Because even if his fear came from trauma, it still built a cage around me. I didn't tell him I knew. I didn't need to. Instead, I poured that discovery into a new speech, one I'd been invited to give for Stanford's Student Advocacy Initiative. The event was titled Roots and Wings, When Family Holds You Back. The room was packed, students, professors, even counselors. I wore a blazer that didn't quite fit, and shoes that pinched, but I stood taller than I ever had. I told my story, not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as someone who had learned to choose herself. Halfway through, I saw a woman slip into the back row. She wore a scarf pulled up around her neck and sat hunched like she was hoping not to be seen. It was my mother. I kept speaking. After the applause, as people mingled and asked questions, I spotted her again, standing alone near the exit. She didn't move toward me, didn't wave, but she held something in her hands. I walked toward her. She handed me a small folder. Inside was a printed copy of my speech, highlighted, annotated in her handwriting, words underlined, notes in the margins. I didn't know this part hurt you so much. And at the bottom, I'm still learning how to be your mother. I didn't say anything. I just handed her another copy of the speech. This one without highlights, clean, unmarked. I watched her eyes fill, but not spill. Then she turned and left. I didn't follow. That was the beginning of something neither of us had words for. 1 year later, my sister called me, her voice trembling with joy. "I got into Yale," she said. "Full scholarship." I nearly dropped the phone. "And," she added, "Mom filled out the entire application. She made sure the essay was scanned, the FAFSA submitted, everything. She even made a spreadsheet." I sat on the floor of my apartment again. Same floor, same ceiling. But this time the music playing wasn't mine. It was my sister's voice, alive with possibility. Sometimes we don't heal by changing the people who hurt us. Sometimes we heal by breaking the pattern for the ones who come next. The day I turned in my thesis, I cried in a bathroom stall and didn't even try to hide the sound. Intergenerational control and silent rebellion wasn't just a paper. It was a confession, a wound, a war I hadn't known how to name, until I dissected it with theory, case studies, and the echoes of my own childhood. I analyzed the way love can warp into ownership, how loyalty becomes a leash, and how silence can carry more weight than a scream. My advisor said it was groundbreaking. I thought it was just honest. When graduation came, I wore a simple white dress under my gown. No cords, no family in the front row. But in the crowd were 3 people who mattered more. My sister, beaming with her Yale sweatshirt, Professor Lynn, arms crossed and eyes bright, and a girl I'd never met before, holding a copy of the silent scholarship against her chest. I didn't speak at the ceremony. I didn't need to. My name was called. I walked. I crossed the stage, and when I held the diploma in my hands, I didn't think about my parents' absence. I thought about presence, my own. I was here. I had made it. And I had done it on my terms. Months later, I got a call from the dean of a nearby university. They'd read my thesis, wanted to know if I'd consider teaching a seminar on family psychology. "Your voice," he said, "is the one these students need to hear." The first day I stood in front of a classroom, I wore the same shoes I wore when I walked out of my parents' house. They were scuffed and cracked, but they reminded me what it meant to leave. I looked out at a room full of young faces, some eager, some uncertain, and I thought, what if someone had stood here when I was 17? What if someone had told me I wasn't wrong for wanting more? So I said it. You are not selfish for dreaming of a life beyond what others can imagine for you. You are not ungrateful for wanting space. You are not broken for needing freedom. A few students blinked hard. One scribbled something down. That was enough. As the semester rolled on, I taught them about patterns, trauma, inherited fear. But I also taught them about reclaiming stories, about compassion without compliance, and about the power of choosing your own name. And when it ended, one student wrote on their evaluation, "Thank you for making me feel seen before I knew I was invisible." That night, I walked home and made tea, sat on my windowsill. The air smelled like rain, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had anything to prove. Weeks later, I returned to the town I once tried to escape. It hadn't changed much. The same gas station, same grocery store, same cracked sidewalk that once tripped me in middle school. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest, letting my feet remember. I reached the old station and stood outside for a while, watching as a teenager in a blue apron carried boxes to the dumpster. Inside, I ordered a coffee and sat at the booth in the corner. The one where I'd once spilled soda, where I'd first seen Claire after the lie began to unravel. The plastic seat was cracked now. The table still wobbled, but it held me. I took out a notebook and began to write. Have you ever stayed somewhere you didn't belong? Not because you loved it, but because someone else was afraid to let you go? The question wasn't for me anymore. It was for everyone who had written to me, who had whispered, "Me too," who had waited in the dark for someone to turn on the light. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and drove home. The book took 6 months. I called it The Price of Staying. It wasn't a memoir. It was a map through guilt, silence, betrayal, and finally, freedom. I wrote it for the girl I was and the girls I'd never meet. When it hit the bestseller list, I didn't celebrate. I just opened the emails. One from a woman in her 40s who had stayed in her hometown until her mother died. One from a teenager in India, hiding her college applications under her bed. One from a father who said, "I didn't know I was doing it too." The book was added to the psychology curriculum in 3 universities within the year. My mother sent me a photo. No caption. It was of our living room. On the shelf, beside a vase and some family albums, was The Price of Staying. No words, just placement. That was enough. One evening, as I walked across campus, a girl stopped me. She looked maybe 16, eyes wide with the kind of hope that hadn't yet been bruised. "Are you Emily Lane?" I smiled. "Depends who's asking." She grinned, nervous. "I just wanted to say, your story helped me tell mine." I nodded, "Then keep telling it." As she walked away, I whispered to myself, "So will I." Because stories don't end with freedom. They begin there,